Chapter 8. Jarbidge was an evil giant who ate men. The canyon was one of the most beautiful canyons on earth, filled with game and rivers running with trout. Brave people lived there for many seasons and loved the land. They knew every salt lick where the deer would come. They knew every berry patch to pick in late summer. They knew where the best roots were. They were happy until the devil came. He was hairy and sneaky. Brave men hunted for him, but only teeth or maybe a foot was ever seen again. He hid in caves and rocks, waiting for the men, then would scoop them up in baskets, carry them off, and eat them. He would eat a whole village in a night. Finally, it was too much, and the people sadly left. Now, white men lived there in a town named after the giant devil Jarbidge, or Jarbidge. Turning north from Elko, the road was easy, the mountains before them impressive. The nights were cooler as they climbed in elevation, patches of snow still here and there. Raider was grateful for the coolness. His ability to tolerate heat had been affected by his near-death experience in Death Valley. It was slow going, and they had to overnight. Raider hated wasting time, but Ivy loved their passionate nights together. His days were filled with work, but at night she had his full attention, and she loved every touch. She liked being able to seduce him even when he was busy during the day. Just the right amount of naughtiness kept life spicy. She discovered that she was a woman of intense and varied appetites. Her curiosity piqued by the numerous brothel ads she'd become so accustomed to seeing. She would push the boundaries of decency. Raider found her exciting and troubling. Getting an early start, the dirt road climbed slowly up, rounding ridges and crossing meadows filled with gold and purple flowers. The drop-offs became sharper and sharper, beautiful and deadly. The road was so steep at one point, Ivy was able to touch the golden flowers with her hand as they very slowly climbed. She tried not to be afraid, but the narrow road, 15% grade, and views of rocky, bottomless pits caused her heart to race. She felt ill. "Raider, just let me out," she pleaded. "I'll walk this patch. I'm sure I can keep up. Please, just let me out." Raider was offended, as if she doubted his skill or ability to care for her. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm not stopping to let you out. You're acting like a fool." Ivy had already learned it was pointless to argue. Although he had never seen it turned on her, she had seen flashes of a killing temper when Raider was crossed. She tried to hum a comforting tune, but fear made her mouth dry and thoughts jumbled. On the steepest upgrades, the Ford had to drive in reverse or it would just stall, the gasoline unable to reach the engine. Climbing backward only magnified her fear, constantly looking back down the awful grade. The final descent into the canyon was a horrible 21% grade, but mercifully short. Ivy unclenched her hands, palms slightly bloodied by her nails. The pretty yellow flowers she had picked crushed. The town was humming, alive with the hope of more gold and the processing of gold already found. Raider put up a flyer at the store and checked in at the Crumley and Walker Log Hotel and Success Bar and Cafe to set up shop. Cutting an 80-20 deal with Crumley, he sent Ivy out to buy coffee and sandwiches. It was understood she would ask around about Cull and the missing money. She headed into a large white tent signed Jarbidge Grill Restaurant. Mules congregated heavily in the muddy streets, and Ivy wasn't sure if she smelled the food, the mules, or both. She left with 4 bologna sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, in the name of someone who knew Cool well. As they ate, Raider had an idea to give out a couple free appointments, making sure Ivy's contact was one of them. A pretty girl passing out some free coupons would look just like a great sales pitch. Raider took care of the miners as they came into the hotel, and Ivy went to pass out the free coupons. Finally, following the description, it wasn't hard for her to find her man. Just as she'd been told, right outside the Mint Bar was a dirty old man dressed in a bowler and faded red union suit, known locally as Foxy Grandpa. Plastering a smile on, Ivy gave him her flyer, told him where to find the dentist, and how lucky he was to be one of the few chosen to get the prize. It was a little hard to know if he understood in his drunken stupor, but he tipped his stained, moth-eaten hat and thanked her. Ivy could only hope for the best. She passed out a few more so it wouldn't look suspicious, and headed back to the log hotel. Raider wasn't there. Apparently he was between customers, so she went looking for him. There wasn't a lot of places he could be. The Mint Bar, Dozier Restaurant. She stopped outside of Mrs. McCulloch's barbershop. Through the window, she saw 3 chairs filled by 3 men being shaved by 3 very buxom women, and one of those men was Raider. Hopping mad, Ivy thought about what to do. Women were at a particular premium in this very isolated canyon town. Surely she could do something to teach him a lesson. Ivy decided to wait and headed back to the log hotel. Foxy Grandpa was already there even before Raider returned. Perfect, she thought. She could get the information she needed and not even tell him. Then she could go look for the missing money herself. She didn't need Raider. So Ivy pretended to give Foxy Grandpa an exam, sweet-talked information out of him, and sent him on his way. When Raider returned, smiling and clean-shaven, Ivy sweetly told him, Foxy Grandpa was too drunk to show up, but maybe he'll come tomorrow. There's lots of good work here, isn't there? Can we please stay a few days? Business was good, so Raider didn't mind, and Ivy was happy imagining her little treasure hunt, in her mind, alone. The line for Raider's services started early and was long. Having a real chair and tools also made him something of a sideshow. Guys would just stand around just to watch their friend get a tooth filled. Mining camps were severely short of entertainment options. Ivy waited until mid-morning when Raider was well into his patients before scooting out. The money on the stage had been valued at nearly $4,000. Strangely, while bloody mail was scattered all over and a dog had led them to the scene, no cash had been recovered. The robbery had happened during a blizzard, so Cool couldn't have gone very far. Locals had combed the area thoroughly, but Foxy Grandpa figured Cool had planned ahead and made a hidden cache. They had run some shady enterprises in the past together, and learning to hide contraband was one of their tricks. But even Foxy hadn't found it. Of course, being blind drunk 8 days a week didn't help. Ivy drove the Ford to the closest place she could and then got out to hike the area looking for anything out of place. Ivy was glad to have the .22. It felt lonely and scary to be where a murder had occurred a few short months ago, and the shadows of the hoodoos, rock piles hovering like misshapen giants. The driver who was killed was just a young man, his life ended by the back of his head being blown out. It was eerie wondering what it felt like at the moment of death. Ivy felt like she was being watched and thought about the warnings about bears and cougars in the area. Climbing around the hoodoos, she pushed on small rocks to see if any were loose. She tried to shake it off, but suddenly she began to feel faint and nauseous. Unexpectedly, she threw up. It passed as she sat a bit, but feeling weak, she decided to postpone the hunt until tomorrow. Ivy headed back to town. She was late getting supper ready, having napped into the late afternoon. Raider looked grim when she had to confess she wasn't feeling well. Ivy, when was the last time you had your monthly cycle? Ivy was surprised and embarrassed and then thoughtful. Now that she thought about it, she hadn't had one since she'd been with Raider. She'd been so busy it hadn't really crossed her mind. Ivy, you may be pregnant. Being a mother had never been a thought in Ivy's mind. She had always thought of herself as modern and independent. Shocked and confused, she barely heard Raider's words through her own foggy thinking. Don't worry, honey. I'll take care of this little problem. Kissing her forehead, he left Ivy alone for several hours, and she slept. She wasn't sure what time it was or how much time had passed when Raider woke her up. He handed her a hot drink and told her to sip on it. Incredibly bitter, Ivy spewed the first taste out. Raider, what is this? She was wide awake now. Juniper oil and tansy tea for Mrs. McCulloch. Said you'd be right as rain after this. That just made it all the more bitter to Ivy. It will make you all regular again, and we won't have to worry about any more children. He was setting up and filling a canvas bathtub he had also brought into their tiny room. Coming over to her, he gripped her arm harshly. Now don't be a child, just drink up that tea. He suddenly seemed so hard to Ivy. He began to undress her, not to make love, but to shuffle her over to the now steaming tub he lifted her into. Ivy howled, the water scalding. Raider, stop, please, she begged. You'll be all right, just be quiet. And he held her down by her shoulders. I know it's uncomfortable, but just wait a couple minutes. Ivy struggled, but got nowhere. Raider was not a big man, but he was incredibly strong and wiry. He offered her a bottle of whiskey to calm her down and take away the terrible, bitter taste of the tea. Ivy wasn't sure she could even keep it down and began to heave. Raider gave her more whiskey. Come on, girl, help me out here. I'm just trying to make this easy for both of us. He tried to soothe and pet her body as the whiskey took effect. Her mouth, her body, and her mind were going numb. Like scum on the water, the tiny little shadow birds gathered on the surface and then dove under to enter Ivy's body, rooting deep into her womb, devouring blood, tissue, and child. Over the next couple days, Ivy stayed in bed weak. She was cold and clammy, her blood pressure low. Her heart beat irregularly, and sometimes it paused, and Ivy wasn't sure it would beat again. The hemorrhaging began after the first day, soaking all the sheets and blankets. The cramping was so severe she couldn't even move to go to the outhouse or keep herself clean. She kept retching to vomit, but there was nothing to bring up, and stinking sweat covered her. She just lay in the filth until Raider would come and help her when he was done each day. Ivy had never felt so unclean or so powerless. She surely had never been sicker in her life. Time crawled, and then it just stopped. And then there was no time. There was just nothing. It had been only a few weeks since they'd been married, but it seemed a lifetime. How could so much have changed so quickly? Gradually, she got stronger, her young body recovering, and Raider was anxious to move on. There were many more camps and a lot more money to be made before the winter snows began to fly, making travel impossible. The drive out of the canyon seemed less terrifying, but more surreal. Feeling numb, Ivy let her hand trail on the carpet of wildflowers, wondering how she could have been so afraid before. She felt like she had grown up somehow, and fear would never again get an upper hand on her. Raider was just glad to be on the move again. They'd made good money in Jarbidge, and except for Ivy's little spell, he felt it had been a good trip so far.